Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to GME Compass. I'm Julie Delano, co-founder of GME Compass. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic that I believe sits at the heart of every successful program evaluation committee, yet it often receives far less attention than your survey data, your meeting agendas, or your annual reports. Today's presentation is titled How Leadership Culture Impacts Your PEC Success. The subtitle, in my opinion, says it all. Why the most effective PECs have less to do with forms and more to do with culture. Throughout my career in graduate medical education, I've seen programs with beautiful documentation, detailed agendas, robust data collection systems that struggle to achieve meaningful improvement. So, we're going to explore why leadership culture might be one of the most influential factors that are determining whether a PEC becomes a meaningful driver of change or simply another committee meeting on the calendar. So, let's get started. Before we begin, a quick disclosure. I have no financial disclosures to report. All content shared today is drawn from the broad continuum of experiences that we've had throughout our GME careers. The information presented reflects our personal knowledge and experiences. It's not intended to represent any current GME roles or past that we have held. And by the end of the presentation, hopefully today you'll be able to define leadership culture, understand its impact on the PEC effectiveness, recognize leadership behaviors, and strengthen or weaken PEC performance. Identify common cultural barriers to meaningful program evaluation and understand how psychological safety influences feedback as well as improvement. And then finally, develop strategies to create a culture that supports continuous process and program improvement. So as we move through these concepts, I encourage you to think about how your own program and honestly assess where your culture supports improvement and where it might unintentionally create barriers. So one of the most common misconceptions that I encounter is the belief that a program evaluation committee is struggling, but then the committee itself must be the problem. People are often assuming things such as your committee isn't engaged, your faculty might be burnt out, people have too many things on the table, the members aren't prepared, the data isn't sufficient, meetings aren't productive. However, it's important to think about and have some time for reflection within your program that those issues absolutely 100% can be true. But I found that a lot of PEC challenges are actually leadership and cultural challenges. And thinking about what that culture behavior, the program, departmental, institutional, taking an intrinsic reflection point and thinking about it can help you to improve your long-term program outcomes. So the PEC can only work with the information that people are willing to share. It can only address concerns that are actually identified and said out loud and brought to the meeting. The PEC can only address concerns that we're aware about. The PEC can only improve systems if leadership is willing to acknowledge opportunities for improvement. So in a lot of cases, the effectiveness of a PEC is simply a reflection of the broader organizational culture that's surrounding it. So what do we mean by leadership culture? It can mean a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily have to mean your program leadership, as in yourself as the program coordinator or manager, your PD, your APD. It can, but it doesn't have to. It can or cannot mean your departmental leadership, your chair, your vice chair, or your institutional leadership or your GME leadership. It can mean many different things. It's not what's written in your mission statement or what's presented during orientation. It's the things day to day that people observe consistently. So leadership culture can include things such as how your decisions are being made, how concerns are handled, how concerns are brought to others' attention, to leadership's attention, how your feedback might be received, how mistakes are addressed, and how accountability might be applied. Culture is not what leaders say. It's what leaders consistently reinforce and walk the walk throughout their actions. People learn very quickly what behaviors become rewarded, what might be ignored, dismissed, discouraged, or even so much as punished. Those observations can passively or less so passively shape how they engage with the program. PECs are expected to identify strengths, weaknesses, trends, risks, opportunities for program improvement. The responsibility is dependent upon honest evaluation. Without honestly bringing intrinsic evaluation and feedback to the table, how can you evaluate it? How can you take a true look inside your program and assess and make it better if you're not being honest what you're bringing? People have to feel comfortable sharing their concerns. They have to feel safe when they're discussing their weaknesses. They have to believe that identifying a problem will actually lead to improvement rather than blame. If they don't feel safe, they begin filtering out information. And then what happens from there? Concerns start to go unreported, feedback becomes diluted. You might only be getting breadcrumbs of issues that are actually coming to the table. Discussions become superficial. They become more performative, where you're just going through the motions. And we're back to what we've been talking about throughout this PEC series, where you're just checking boxes and you're not actually creating change in systems improvement. The committee still meets, minutes are still happening, reports are still being generated. However, what isn't happening is meaningful improvement is becoming increasingly more and more difficult. And it doesn't necessarily, in fact, more oftentimes than not, it doesn't happen drastically, and it doesn't happen like whiplash in front of you. It happens very slowly, like a snowball over time. So you don't realize that it's happening until it's already become a bigger, pervasive program issue. What does a healthy PEC culture look like? You often might see open discussions, constructive disagreement, transparency, data-driven decision-making, shared accountability, collaborative problem solving. Most important, people feel comfortable discussing areas that need improvement. Strong programs understand identifying a weakness is not an admission of failure. And that's something that we as program leaders, because we're so close to the operations of a program and we care really deeply about our jobs. Anyone that's here that's watching this video, that's involved in GME Compass, or that's involved in any type of personal and professional development, going to conferences, you're there because you care. You care. You love your trainees. You love your program. You love your department. You love your institution, and you love what you do. So it's very close to your heart. So it's easy to feel defensive when issues are brought to the table, but taking that emotion away allows you to really look at the processes and the systems and be able to create a system of change. It's an opportunity for growth. The purpose of PEC is not to prove that everything is perfect. The purpose is to continuously improve the educational quality within your training program. So while looking at the positive, we also want to look at the opposite. There's certain phrases that immediately might raise concerns about your culture. For example, we don't want to document that. Let's leave that out of the minutes. That might create problems or issues. We don't want leadership to see that. We don't want the DIO to see that. These statements often indicate that a culture is driven by fear rather than improvement. Other warning signs could be things that are a little bit less obvious. It can be things like defensiveness, whether passive or less so, minimizing concerns, avoiding challenging conversations, discouraging dissenting opinions. When things start to feel heated, when really you're just having a good dialogue going back and forth that might happen to be differences in opinions, discouraging those opinions discourages challenging thought processes. Prioritizing appearances that are over transparency. So what is that going to look like on the outside? What is that going to look like on our APE or on our GME presentation? Ironically, these are often the programs that are vulnerable during accreditation reviews because problems remain hidden until they become impossible to ignore. Another important concept in leadership today is psychological safety, which is kind of exactly what I've been talking about. Psychological safety means that people feel comfortable speaking honestly without fear or negative consequences. In program evaluation committee discussions, psychological safety allows people to say this process is not working. Residents have valid concerns. Faculty are struggling. They are having a hard time balancing clinical responsibilities and education. They're having challenges. They're burnt out. We need to improve this area. Without psychological safety, people are going to stay silent. Silence prevents learning. When people feel safe sharing their concerns, organizations gain valuable information. When they don't, opportunities for improvement remain hidden. So considering two different responses to resident feedback. Here we have two different examples. Response number one says, why would the resident say that? Response number 2 says, help me to understand why the residents might feel that way. The difference is very subtle. However, culturally, it is enormous. The first response often creates defensiveness. The second is coming from a space of curiosity and wanting to understand. Defensiveness focuses on protecting the current system. Curiosity focuses on understanding what the reality is. Strong leaders approach feedback with curiosity because that creates learning, and learning ultimately is driving your program and systems improvement. Many programs unintentionally operate within what I call a compliance culture. The focus becomes avoiding citations, looking good, checking boxes, right? What is that going to look like during recruitment? What is it going to look like if we have a citation? What are our applicants going to think? How is that going to affect our recruitment pool? What are people on our social media going to think? Improvement culture looks extremely different. You can take those same opportunities and focus more on your learning, your growth, your transparency, problem solving, and continuous process and systems improvement. The strongest PECs are operating from a forward growth mindset. They're not asking things like, how do we avoid looking bad? They're asking things like, how do we get better? The biggest lesson that I learned working in graduate medical education for as many years that I have is that there is always room to get better. It is such an evolving, changing process that you're never stagnant. It doesn't matter. You can be a perfect, tucked, well wrapped program, but the environment of graduate medical education is always changing. It's always updating. It's always evolving because we're always evaluating ourselves. We as ACGME, as a bigger picture, as an accreditation process, want to get better and want to improve. So with that, we have to continue growing in order to continue doing that. So you're never going to be perfect. So letting go of that baggage allows you to do. Residents observe leadership constantly. They learn very quickly, and remembering that you as leaders are role models for that because they're your future program directors, your future APDs, your future faculty members, chairs, vice chairs, DIOs, and then some. So what topics might be welcomed? What conversations are avoided? If residents believe that their feedback leads to genuine, sincere improvement, they're going to continue providing it. If they believe that feedback disappears into a black hole, participation declines. And I think that it's also important from my personal experience throughout graduate medical education that it is important to highlight that the same goes from the faculty perspective. When you are a leadership that becomes hyper fixated on making the residents happy, you have to be mindful that you can be stifling and silencing your faculty culture, or your institutional culture, or your program leadership culture. And that is not to say that you shouldn't be keeping that in mind. What it is to say is you need to be thinking about the bigger picture of the graduate training program and all of the pieces that go into that. Don't allow yourself to silo your vision to only what is going to make our residents happy, or what is only going to make me as our program leadership happy, or what is only going to make our faculty happy. Look at the entire picture, because our residents are noticing that, our faculty notices that, and we want to do better. If they fear repercussions, honesty starts to decline. Something else that I have observed throughout my career is when you have your PEC meeting, you get feedback, you have your minutes, you have your action plans, you have your pain points that you want to focus on, and then your program leadership or your program director or someone goes through the motions of the meeting and then just does whatever they want anyway. That's when honesty starts to decline, because that's when people start to feel silenced or ignored or undervalued, or why am I sitting here? Your faculty might feel like I could be doing notes right now. Your residents that are at your PEC could feel like I could be helping my team and contributing to what's going on the floor right now, or something like that. Leadership significantly influences the quality and the reliability of the well-rounded experience of the feedback that happens within your institution and your program. So when feedback, but at the same principle as I had said earlier applies to your faculty. Faculty engagement is heavily influenced by leadership behavior. When leaders encourage participation, transparency, collaboration, faculty becomes more invested. They feel like what they're bringing to the meeting and to the table is making a genuine difference. When leaders dismiss their concerns, they resist change, engagement often declines. Faculty don't simply respond to policies, they respond to culture. Culture influences whether faculty see PEC participation as meaningful or merely another administrative requirement that is taking up valuable time in their day. Many leadership barriers are unintentional. Leaderships may dominate the conversations, defend every concern, dismiss opposing viewpoints, focus on explanations instead of solutions, minimize negative feedback. The intention's often good. I say it all the time. It's because we care and we love our programs. However, the impact can be extremely harmful. It is very challenging to sit back and bring your SWOT analysis or things that are opportunities for improvement to the table, present them, and then just let the discussion flow and see where it goes. It's very hard when you're so deep behind the scenes and you know all of the time and the love and the energy and the 10,000 hours that went into creating this process, and it can feel like they're tearing it apart, but they're not. Pause, let it happen, see where it goes. And then that's where your opportunities for improvement can come. People begin withholding information because they don't believe that it might be welcomed. Once that happens, the quality of your PEC discussions suffer. Strong leaders approach PEC discussions differently. They ask, what are we missing? What data supports this? What trends concern us? What are residents telling us? What systems need improvement? Notice the pattern. These questions invite discussion rather than shutting it down. Strong leaders create a space for diverse perspectives. Great leaders act on what they learn. At this point, it's important to recognize that culture is not created solely by program directors. Program coordinators and program managers play a tremendous role in shaping the culture. Through communication, relationship building, process development, transparency, problem solving, coordinators often serve as the operational backbone of programs. Because of that, they influence how people experience this culture every day. Leadership is an influence. Every PEC member contributes to the culture that exists within a program. So how do we intentionally create a stronger culture? Start by normalizing discussions about improvement. Celebrate transparency. Use your data objectively. Separate people from the problems. Focus on systems rather than blame. And perhaps most importantly, communicate your outcomes. When residents and faculty see that the feedback leads to meaningful action, trust begins to grow. Trust fuels engagement from everyone around you. So here's a simple test. Imagine a resident identifies a faculty issue, wellness concern, patient safety risk. Would they feel comfortable reporting it? Would leadership genuinely listen? Would meaningful action follow? Think about these things. Your answer reveals a great deal about your leadership culture within your program, your institution, or your department. Because culture isn't measured by what leaders intend, it's measured by what people experience. So, summarizing today's discussion, leadership culture directly impacts PEC success. Psychological safety drives honest feedback. Transparency supports meaningful evaluation. Curiosity creates improvement. Defensiveness silences people. Continuous improvement requires leadership commitment. And at the end of the day, strong PECs are built upon trust. Without trust, improvement becomes difficult. With trust, improvement becomes possible. So concluding, I want to leave you with a final thought. The most effective PECs are rarely the ones with the most impressive forms, templates, or dashboards. They're the programs where people feel safe telling the truth, having dynamic conversations, difficult discussions, where leaders welcome conversations, where feedback is viewed as information as opposed to criticism, where continuous improvement is valued more than maintaining appearances. Because PEC success is not about creating the appearance of excellence. It's about creating a culture that is continuously pursuing it. And that begins with leadership. So thank you so much for joining us today. If you found this video helpful, please please subscribe, and share it with your GME colleagues. That's how you support us so that we can continue bringing these for our community. If there are leadership, accreditation, PEC, or CCC topics that you would like to discuss in future videos, leave it in the comments below. Till next time, I'm Julie with GME Compass. Remember, accreditation's not an event, it's an operational culture. And we're here to help turn GME complexity into clarity and control. See you in the next video.